Welcome back everyone to Brains on a Budget. Today we're going to be giving VJ a much needed oil change. One of the first things I like to do with a new car is change the oil and change the oil filter, because more often than not you don't know when it was last done, nor do you know what was put in it. So we're going to take the opportunity today to fix that, and it's also going to give us a chance to get underneath the car and make sure everything's alright. So let's get straight to it. So here's everything that we're going to need today. We've got a method of lifting the car up so we can get access underneath, something to lie on, an oil drain pan, a funnel, some rags to help clean up, a pair of gloves, a torque wrench, socket set, new oil filter, engine flush, and obviously the engine oil itself. Now everything on this table cost around 130 quid, but the best part is around £90 of that, so all of this stuff here can be reused again. So before we even think about draining any oil, the first thing that we're going to want to do is get VJ up to operating temperature, and that's really important because it's going to help the oil drain out, and it's also going to mix in any contaminants or any deposits that are in the engine. It will mix those into the oil so that when we drain it, it all comes out with it. So I'm going to run a few errands and take VJ for a spin, and then we'll get to the rest of the oil change. So apparently, to talk about anything remotely intelligent, the internet requires you to wear a white lab coat and a pair of glasses, so that's what I'm doing, and let's not dwell on it. But let's talk about engine oil. How do I know what to put in my car, and what is the difference between all the varieties of engine oil that I can find in my local Halfords or wherever? Well, we're going to talk about that now. The best place to start when looking for what oil is the right one to put in your car is your owner's manual. In here, it'll usually detail the different variants that your car can take and what specification they each need to meet. Now, failing that, the next best place to look is one of many online auto retailers. Often they'll have an area where you can enter in your registration, and from there it'll tell you what oils or whatever other parts you need your car will suit. The last and final option is to ring up a local dealer for your car model or for your car make. I say this is the last option because they'll usually just recommend you their own one. So for example, BMW will just recommend their own BMW oil, and you'll probably end up spending even more on that, which is not the purpose of what we want to do. So the primary way that different oils are distinguished is with a property called viscosity. Now this is basically the amount of energy required to deform a liquid or to shape the liquid. So for example, take something like treacle. Now we all know from GCSE science class that treacle is really viscous, and if we were to try and stir it, it's very difficult, or if you were to pour it out of a container, it would flow out really slowly, and that's all because of its high viscosity. Compare that to something like water, which is a lot less viscous. Water is very easy to stir, or if you were to pour it out of a glass, it would fall out almost instantaneously. However, it's important to remember that viscosity is not constant. In fact, it varies greatly with temperature. Usually, as temperature increases, viscosity decreases. Again, this is something that we can remember from science class. If you were to take your glass of treacle and try and pour it out at room temperature, it would flow very slowly. But if you put it in the microwave and heated it to about 40 or 50 degrees, which is not that hot, a lot less hot than our engines get, it would suddenly flow out so much quicker. And this is because the viscosity has decreased as the temperature has increased. Engine manufacturers make really good use of this because at low temperatures, the higher viscosity helps protect our engines from things like wear. But when we're up to operating temperature, the lower viscosity level helps to keep our engines nice and efficient, ultimately reducing the amount of times you need to fill it up. To find out the viscosity of our oil, what we use is the numbers in big print on the front of the oil container. Now, we've got two different numbers here. The first number is a description of the viscosity at a specified low temperature, and the second number is the same but at a far higher temperature. Now, the higher the number, the more viscous the oil is at that set temperature. So, if we were to have a 5 at the beginning, that would be a more viscous oil at that set low temperature than this one, which is a 0. And the same would happen for this other number. If this were a 40, this oil would be far more viscous at higher temperature than this one is, which is 30 at high temperature. Now the W in between is basically an indication that this oil is good for the winter weather, but almost all modern oils carry this W, so it's not really something worth worrying about. So the next way of distinguishing different oils is by their composition. Now what do I mean by this? Well, you've probably all heard of the terms fully synthetic or conventional or semi-synthetic, and these are basically terms used to describe what the oil is made from and how it was made. So for example, conventional oils describe oils that have been refined from crude oil, so that's just like petrol or diesel. It basically means it's been pumped out of the ground and then they've kind of decided what part of that they want, and that's what the oil is. With fully synthetic oils, they are manufactured from the ground up. So that means that you can have full control of what goes in your oil, and the end result is usually an oil that lasts longer and an oil that performs better. So in almost all cases, a fully synthetic oil is the best option. So next up we've got standards. Now, standards are a way of manufacturers requiring certain properties of oil for their engines. Now a great example of this, and something that we need on VJ as well, is the LL04 standard. This is a standard created by BMW, and it's for diesel cars with a DPF. And effectively what it means is that the oil has to produce a very minimal amount of ash when it's burned. Ash is just the solid contents that are left over after the oil is burned. So not things like the carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide or anything else like that, it's the stuff that you can't burn. Now the problem with having a DPF is it basically filters out everything in the exhaust flow. And if you've got ash, it'll filter that out, but then it won't be able to reburn it, which is the purpose of a DPF. So what will end up happening is over time, if your oil burns and produces a large amount of ash, it will clog up your DPF and your car will die. So BMW require an oil that when burned produces a very minimal amount of ash to reduce the chance of DPF clogging. Now at this point, you're probably thinking, but Wills, which brand do I go for? Surely the one that comes in a nice gold container and that says power on the front of it is the best oil. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. Most modern oils are so good nowadays that it doesn't matter which brand you go for. They're almost all virtually the same. In fact, I would almost recommend going for a slightly cheaper brand, because then you'll feel a little bit easier when you have to change your oil again and you only have to spend 20 to 40 quid rather than, 40 to 100 quid in some cases. This Manol brand that I've bought to put in VJ costs somewhere in the region of £2 to £3.50 per litre. Compare that to the Castrol brand, and this isn't even the fanciest one you can get. This was £10 per litre. Now, granted, this one was for a motorbike, but I've looked at the oil that VJ would need from Castrol, and it's all about the same price. 40 quid for 4 litres. Right, that's enough science, let's get back to doing the oil change. So now that VJ's nice and warm, the next step is going to be to raise it up so that we can gain access underneath. Now, how you do that doesn't really matter as long as you do it safely. In an ideal situation, you're going to want to lift the car so that it's completely level, but I don't have the equipment for that today, so we're going to be using the ramps and we're going to lift up the front of the car. The reality is this isn't going to be a massive deal because the car is only going to sit at about a 4-degree incline, so that's not going to make a massive difference to how much oil we're going to be able to drain. Top tip for when you're using these kinds of ramps, if you've got a lower car like VJ is, then get yourself a piece of wood or something nice and sturdy, stick it at the end of the ramps, and it's just going to help shallow out the angle so that we don't scrape the bottom of his bumper. I've got some gravel behind there just because this isn't the thickest wood. If you had something a bit more substantial, then you should be alright. But we're all lined up, so I'll slowly drive up the ramps, kind of checking as I go, and then once we've made it to the top, I'll chock up the rear wheels so that he doesn't then fall back down. Next step is to add our engine flush. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because, as I said earlier, I don't know when the last time the oil in this was changed, nor do I know what the oil was changed with, so this is a really good way to kind of give the engine a thorough clean, get out anything that might have been in there before, and also help loosen some deposits. All it really is just like a thinner with some kind of cleaning agents in there. So it's just going to allow the oil to kind of eat up all of the deposits and contaminants and kind of suspend them in the oil. And then that will all come out once we drain it. It's not something you need to do every single oil change, but we're going to do it today on VJ. So very easy. We'll just open our oil fill cap. Get yourself a funnel because that's going to make our lives a lot easier. I don't want to try and pour this tin blindly. It's just like a sweet corn tin or something, very, very low tech. So it almost looks like diesel on the inside. It's a very kind of slight yellow colour, but very, very thin. And then we'll just pour that into the engine. Now the instructions are really easy on this. All we do is pour it in once the engine's hot, which it already is, and then leave it to idle for another 10 minutes, and then the oil will be ready to drain. So they say that one of these cans is good enough to clean up to 6 litres of engine oil. Since VJ's only 5.5, that's plenty. Let's start him back up and I'll let him idle for 10 minutes. Now if you can access your oil filter from your engine bay, you're going to want to loosen it, so that's what we're going to do now. On the E87, all you need to do is lift up this engine cover out of the way, and underneath, back here, is our oil filter hiding. A couple of mechanics are going to hate me for this, but we're going to use the AJ to get it off. If anyone is wondering, it's a 25mm socket. So whoever decided to do this oil filter up last time decided that it would be sensible to crank it to about 1 billion Newton meters. So I've managed to avoid snapping it off, and we've now got it loose. This is where not having an AJ would have been really useful, because you can apply your torque without thinking it's going to slip off. You're going to shear the top of it. So all we're going to do is loosen this to a point where some of the air can come back in, and that'll just allow the oil to drain out into the oil pan. So I'll leave that for a few minutes now. Now with the rag out to help catch any spillage, I'm going to pull this out and pop the filter in this box so that we can contain any spillage. Then we're going to put the cap back in place, just so we don't have anything falling into the engine. Like so. And then it goes. And I've done an alright job there. A little bit of spillage. What else can you expect? Take the old filter out of here. Persuasion, there we go. And then stick this cap back in place. And then I'm going to loosen all the rest of the kind of orifices into the engine. So loosen the oil fill cap, do the same with the dipstick, and all this is just going to make sure that oil is draining from everywhere and we can get air in to kind of replace the oil that is leaving through the bottom, and it'll make everything a lot quicker. So let's go underneath the car. Because getting crushed is not my idea of a good time, I'll put the car in gear just to be absolutely sure, and we can access our oil drain plug under this little tab. So I've got a screwdriver here, and we'll just twist this piece of plastic kind of 180 degrees, and there we go. There it drops along with some crap, and in here is our drain plug. Judging by how it's orientated, I reckon we're pretty good there, but I'm going to want to get out of the firing line. Right, well here goes nothing. We've got some gloves on so that we don't burn ourselves. This is probably going to be pretty hot, and in our case we're going to be using a, what is this, 17mm socket. Did that do something? Yay, we're loose. That's what she said. Loosen that off. Hey! Then we'll let this drain for a few minutes, and once it stops dripping, put this plug back on with a new crush washer. Now to change our crush washer, really easy, just pull that off there. It looks in pretty decent nick actually, so maybe this was done not too long ago, just everything was over tightened. And we'll get the new one, which will usually come with your oil filter. So got the oil filter, and then also a little plastic bag, and we've got a replacement O-ring, as well as our new crush washer. That's the new one. Put the old one somewhere else, you don't mix them up. And then with just a little bit of brake clean, just take the opportunity to give it a quick wipe, and then we'll just replace with our new crush washer. And there we go. That's ready to go on. We'll give the threads just a quick little bit of lubrication with some new oil, and then that'll go in nice and easily and hopefully come out a lot easier next time. So this pretty much now drained. We can move our oil drain pan out of the way, and then get our new, or our old sump plug with new copper crush washer, and with a bit of lubrication on the threads, screw that bad boy back in, and then according to our Haynes manual, this needs to now be torqued down to 25 Newton meters. There we go. Almost like 25 Newton meters is actually a lot less torque than you think, and it'll be so much easier to remove afterwards. So I'll give that another quick wipe, and then we'll replace our plastic cover, turn this 180 degrees, and now we're done underneath the car. And I might even go ahead and, just with the engine off, just back the car back onto the driveway so that we're level, and that will allow us to fill the car properly. So now it's time to give our oil filter cap a quick clean. We've got a replacement O-ring for this, so we'll pull this out like so. This looks in pretty good condition as well, so I reckon this has been done relatively recently. Cleaning it will give you a good idea of what kind of condition these things are in. You know, if you've got a crack or you've got a thread that's broken, then this is the best time to kind of spot that, and it's easiest to spot that when it's not covered in oil. In here we've got our new O-ring, and then here we've got our new oil filter. So first things first, let's put our new O-ring on, wipe that in a little bit of fresh oil, give it a little bit of lubrication. The key here is the bearing goes in this groove here, not this far one, which some people mistake, and then you end up crushing the O-ring. So we'll gently feed that back over, roll that down until we're in our groove. There we are, and then just kind of check along it, make sure it's not twisted, and then now I'm going to replace this in here. Very simply, this should just click into place. There we go, that's nice and seated, and you should be able to see that the gap is even on all sides, which means we've got it nicely seated. So before we put this back in the engine, you might notice that there's a little kind of pointy bit at the end. Now this goes into a corresponding hole that's inside the oil filter housing. We'll screw this in, and if we feel that there's kind of a lot of resistance and it doesn't want to go any further, we'll back it out, turn it just a little bit, and then try again, and hopefully at some point this will find its way into the hole, and then you'll find yourself being able to screw this all the way in. So I think I can feel that. Yeah, I think that's now seated itself, and now the filter is basically moving inside this cap. So we'll keep on spinning this, get our AJ out, sorry mechanics, keep going until it seats properly. And right, that's now seated, so we're going to torque this down to 25 Newton meters, and from tightening the bolt underneath we know that it's not very tight. And whilst we're here, we'll just get our rag, bit of brake clean, and seeing as we're going to be using the dipstick quite a bit now to kind of register how much oil we've got in, we'll just give it a little bit of a clean, because how often does this thing get a clean? Never is the answer to that. So now we can finally get on to putting some oil in, VJ. You want to know how much oil approximately your car can hold. So in our case, VJ needs about 5.5 litres from completely empty. So I'm assuming we're going to be a little bit less than that, maybe 5.4, 5.3, because we couldn't get the car completely level, and you're never going to be able to drain everything. So what we'll do is we'll add about 50%. As like a good rough ballpark. Check the dipstick, see if we're registering, and if not, just keep adding more until we're at the maximum line on the dipstick. So I'll do that now. Open up the oil fill port. Want to use our funnel to make things a little less messy, hopefully. Grab a rag, and on the side of this we've got graduations for kind of the volume. So this is a 5 litre container, so we're going to be aiming for 3, which is just over the halfway mark, so we're going to want to go just below here. Which is a nice, quick and dirty volume measurement. Now, when you're emptying any container like this, you don't want to fill the entire exit with oil. You want to allow some air to come in, and that's going to stop that kind of glug glug glugging that you might get. So we'll come in sideways like so. Get our, and then just start pouring. So that's probably just over halfway, which is around the 3 litres we were aiming for, so I'll just put that to one side and we'll just check if we're registering the dipstick. No, not yet. We go on to add probably another litre, so we'll go down to the next large graduation. Once we're finally at that max fill line, we'll idle the engine for a couple of minutes, do the same thing where we leave it for all the oil to drain back down to the bottom, check the dipstick and top up until we're at that max fill line again. So it's been a few minutes, so I'm going to assess the level of the dipstick, and we are bang on the max fill line, so we should be in a good position now to crank the engine over for a minute or two, and then we'll leave it after that. Don't forget to close your oil fill cap again, and we'll give it a start. So I've just let the engine run for a couple of minutes and then let it sit for a couple of minutes, so we should be in a good position to assess what our oil level is now that every area that needs it will have been given it. So, and yeah, we're at just over the minimum line, so we're going to need probably an extra ½ litre, judging by how much it took last time. So I'm pretty happy with that. We're about at the max fill line. I'm going to give it another crank just to be sure, let it stand for a bit, because the best time to get it perfect is whilst it's on the driveway and you're not using it under load. And then we'll clear up the engine bay a little bit, wipe everything down, and then stick the cover back on, and we're done. So we're done. VJ now has some fresh oil and a fresh oil filter. I think he's going to be grateful for it. If I were to have got this done at like a BMW service centre, I'll be looking probably in the region of about 150 quid. So we're already cheaper than that, and we've got a load of tools now that we can use for future oil changes or other maintenance. You could get it done for cheaper at one of those kind of quick service centres, probably 70-80 quid, but I don't know, you hear so many news stories of people not actually having their oil changed when they go there, and you know, we can be sure of what was put in it, how it was done and when it was done. So I'm going to take him for a spin, and if you enjoyed today's video and you want to see more, then hit the subscribe button down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.